Good morning, dear students of class 12. Welcome to this English online learning class. Today, we are going to take up part 3 of the text of the lesson, the third level. So first, let's quickly revise what we did in part 1 and part 2 of this lesson. As already discussed earlier, this lesson, the third level, by Jack Finney, is a science fiction. Now the lesson begins with Charlie, a 31-year-old New Yorker who was an office goer. He ventured into the third level of the Grand Central Station. But the claim that was made by the presidents of the New York Central and New York New Haven Hartford Railroads was that there were only two levels of the Grand Central Station. But Charlie had been to the third level of this Grand Central Station. So, the obvious step that he did was to talk to his friends and including his psychiatrist friend. Now, the psychiatrist's friend's interpretation was that it was a waking dream wish fulfillment. He said Charlie was unhappy, but this kind of statement made his wife kind of mad, angry. But then he interpreted it like this, that the world is full of uncertainties, war, worries, and so many other problems. And Charlie just needed a medium to escape. Now Charlie refutes this claim. He says that I know I wanted to escape, but others also in this modern world do want to escape. But they never went to the third level of the Grand Central Station. Why only me? Now, other interpretations, which was given by his psychiatrist friend and which was also supported by his friends, was that Charlie's habit of stamp collection was also a kind of temporary refuge from reality. But Charlie's grandfather also had this hobby of stamp collection. But those days were very peaceful and he never needed any refuge from reality. Even President Roosevelt had the hobby of stamp collection. So now he tries to tell the readers exactly the sequence of events, what happened that day. That night, last summer, he had worked late in the office and he was in a hurry to reach his apartment, and so he decided to take a subway from the Grand Central as it is faster than the bus. Now, he claims that he's just an ordinary guy. Charlie, 31 years, and he was also dressed in an ordinary, usual fashion, which probably others also were. He was not unusual. He passed across a dozen of men who were also like him, and he was very much in his senses. He never wanted to escape. He was in the real world. He wanted to rush home to join his wife Louisa. And as he turned into the Grand Central from the Vanderbilt Avenue, and he took a flight of steps which led him to the first level, where trains like the 20th century were taken, as he had to catch a suburban train, so he took another flight of stairs which led him to would lead him to the second level. But then, as he ducked into the arched doorway, he got lost. And this has not happened with him today only. Earlier also, many times he had got lost. He has been in and out of Grand Central hundreds of times, but every time he used to bump into new doorways, stairs, and corridors. And once he got into a tunnel about a mile long and came into the lobby of the Roosevelt Hotel. And another time in the office building on the 46th Street, 3 blocks away. So this is what he wants to emphasized that this was not the first time he had got lost. Earlier also, and he cites two occasions when he had lost his way at the Grand Central Station. And sometimes I think Grand Central is growing like a tree, pushing out new corridors, staircases, and like roots. So then the corridor in which he was uh, moving, it was angling left and slanting downward. He realized that he was on the wrong direction, but he kept on walking. Then he heard some sort of uh, noise of people talking, and he, uh, when he reached the place, he took a short flight of stairs, and suddenly he found himself at the platform. First, he thought it was the second level, from where he would catch a suburban train. But then he saw the platform looked different. He saw rooms were smaller, fewer ticket windows, train gates, and even the information booth in the center was of wood and overlooking. And the man was wearing green eye shade at the information booth and long black sleeve protectors. The dressing sense was different, and the lights were dim and flickering. And they probably then he realized that these were the open flame gas lights. Even the pitons on the floor were of brass. He caught an eye of a man who was pulling a gold watch from his vest pocket, and he was looking at the watch. And even his dressing sense looked very different. It seemed as if it belonged to the 1890s or something. He saw there were a group of people, and they were dressed in a different style, old-fashioned style. And even their hairstyles were different. Their beards, mustaches style were also different. A woman passed in through the train gate. She wore a dress with leg of mutton sleeves and skirts to the top of her high button shoes. Even her dressing sense was very different. And then he saw a locomotive of the old times, a very small Currier and Eaves locomotive. To make sure, he walked across to a newspaper boy who was selling the newspapers. And he looked at the stacks of the papers. It was the World. The World hasn't been published for many years. And the lead story that the newspaper carried was about President Cleveland. Now he turned towards the ticket window because he thought that he has reached the third level of the Grand Station. And now he could take this opportunity of buying tickets for himself and his wife Louisa, and they would be able to go anywhere in the US back to the year 1894. And he thought that he would take 2 tickets to Galesburg, Illinois. Have you ever been there? It's a wonderful town still, with big old frame houses, huge lawns, tremendous trees whose branches meet overhead, and roofs of the streets. And in 1894, summer evenings were twice as long, and people sat on their lawns, the men smoking cigars, talking quietly, and the women waving palm leaf fans with fireflies all around. In a peaceful world, to be back there with the First World War still 20 years off, and World War II over 40 years in the future. I wanted 2 tickets for that. So he wanted to go to Galesburg, Illinois. And he shares with the writer his uh, small town, Galesburg, Illinois, in 1894, where before 20 years before the First World War and 40 years before the Second World War. How life was peaceful there. The clerk figured the fare. He glanced at my fancy hatband. but he figured the fare, and I had enough for 2 coach tickets one. So the clerk worked out on the fare, and he also looked at his hatband, which probably seemed different. And then he, uh, Charlie, was satisfied because he had enough money to get him 2 coach tickets one way, because he never wanted to return back. But when I counted out the money and looked up, the clerk was staring at me. He was looking at me. He nodded at the bills. "That's aunt money, mister," he said. So he refused to accept the money. "And if you are trying to skin me, you won't get very far." He also threatened him by saying, "If you're trying to uh, fool me, you are not going to go far. You are right here." And he glanced at the crash drawer beside him. Of course, the money was old style bills, half again as big as the money we use now, and different. The money at the crash drawer was different. It was old style bills, not the currency which is used in the present. So now Charlie had no option. He quickly turned away, got out fast. He had to leave the place immediately because he feared he would be caught. And there's nothing nice about jail even in 1890. The jails, the prison back in 1894 were also horrible places to live in. And he dreaded that if he remained here for some time, probably he would land up in the prison of those days. And that was that. I left the same way I came, I suppose. He doesn't remember much, but probably he says I took the same route and I came out. Next day, during lunch hour, I drew $300 out of the bank, nearly all we had, and bought old style currency that really worried my psychiatrist. So I decided. I had made up my mind, and during lunch hour, I took $300 out of the bank so that I could buy old style currency. And this was a cause of worry for my psychiatrist. You can buy old money at almost any coin dealer, but you have to pay a premium. My $300 bought less than 200 in the old style bills, but I didn't care. Eggs were 13 cents a dozen in 1890. So although the exchange of this new currency, uh, of old currency into of new exchange from new currency um, into old currency was a loss for him. But he did not mind this loss because he thought that if he was able to reach Gettysburg, Illinois of 1894, he would not be at loss because here things were more cheaper compared to the present day. But I never again found the corridor that leads to the third level at the Grand Central Station, although I have tried often. I kept on trying many times, but never again I have found the third level of the Grand Central Station. Louisa was pretty worried. My wife was very much worried when I told her all this, and didn't want me to look for the third level anymore. She did not want her husband to uh, continue with his search of the third level. And after a while I stopped, and so I decided to stop. And I went back to my stamps, and I decided to resort to my old habit of stamp collection. We'll stop here and continue with the remaining part next day. Thank you. Have a nice day. Take care.